Now we'll work on finishing up our discussion of the last part of the book of Exodus, particularly the section about the tabernacle being commanded and then built. Here you have an image of what the tabernacle looked like. Basically a tent with different pieces of furniture here and there. The tabernacle was a movable shrine and was placed at the center of the Israelite camp to symbolize God's presence there. And it became the center of Israelite worship. Different names for this structure. One is tabernacle. Hebrew word is mishkan. It means literally a dwelling place. Specifically the dwelling place of God, that God was in their midst. Speaking of the immanence of God's presence in theological terms. Then it was also called a sanctuary, and at least one of the terms for sanctuary is kodesh, meaning holy place. It was holy because it was set apart from other places. It was set apart, and as you can see, it had a fence around it, and the Holy of Holies was set apart by thick curtains to keep any eye from seeing the presence of God in the midst. It was also called the tent of the meeting. It was a place where people would go to meet with God. The purpose of the tabernacle was a symbol of the holiness of God. Couldn't just go barging in on God because he was holy, and people that barged in on him were subject to being killed. It's also a symbol of the presence of God. The tabernacle was a movable shrine representing God's presence. It took a little bit of Mount Sinai, where God appeared in a visible way in invisible phenomena on top of the mountain with the thunder and the lightning and the billows of smoke. And so it's bringing a little bit of that with them as they leave Sinai. It's the place to which prayer was to be directed. Let them make me a sanctuary, it says, that I may dwell among them. Again, the sanctuary was for the dwelling place of God. So it emphasizes both God's transcendence on the one hand, holiness, separation, but also his immanence on the other. And this was where they would do the animal sacrifice, which was at the heart of Israelite worship, which we'll talk about in Leviticus 1 through 7. And the tabernacle's bronze altar was where such sacrifices would take place. Now, the structure of the tabernacle, you can see that it had an opening to the east, and as you would go in, you'd come to the bronze altar, a burnt offering. And then there was a laver. That's where you could wash your hands and wash all the blood and guts and stuff off as you were conducting the sacrifice as a priest. And then the priest could go into the tabernacle itself. There was a golden lampstand or menorah there. There was a table of showbread. There was an altar of incense. And then there was a thick curtain, the veil, that separated everyone from the Holy of Holies. By the way, the dimensions of these things, 10 cubits by 10 cubits by 10 cubits, that'd be like 15 feet cubed. Not that big a place. Likewise, the holy place, this section here, is only 10 cubits by 20 cubits by 10 cubits. That would be like 15 feet by 30 feet by 15 feet high. So again, it's not that big a thing. The most important part was in the Holy of Holies, where the presence of God actually was, and in that Holy of Holies was placed the Ark of the Covenant, symbol of the covenant. The Ark of the Covenant was a box covered of wood covered with gold, with angelic cherubim statues on the top. It symbolized the throne of God, or perhaps the threshold, the footstool of his throne. If you imagine God's throne is in heaven, this would be his footstool, or perhaps it's the throne of God on earth. It was the only piece of furniture in the Holy of Holies, and it was the most sacred object in Israelites' religion. Again, emphasizing that God is enthroned above the Ark of the Covenant, or various verses, such as Psalm 80 and verse 1, "You who are enthroned above the cherubim." Statement repeated several times. 1 Samuel 4:4, "The Ark of the Covenant of the Lord of hosts, who is enthroned above the cherubim." The Ark symbolizes the throne of God. Inside the Ark there was the Ten Commandments, or the Decalogue. There was a pot of manna, a reminder of the miracles that God had performed in the wilderness, and Numbers add that eventually they put Aaron's rod, which had blossomed, in that ark as well. The lid of the ark is variously described in different translations as the mercy seat, that's King James, or the atonement cover, NIV. But the word for the lid on the ark is Hebrew word is kaporet, related to kippur, which means to make atonement. Compare the Jewish term Yom Kippur, Day of Atonement. But it was there that the high priest would come and sprinkle the blood on the Day of Atonement on the atonement cover or the mercy seat. There the blood was presented before God, and that's where atonement took place. Say a couple of words about the golden calf story before we're done with this section. Moses went back up to the mountain, and while he was gone, he was gone for 40 days and 40 nights. The Israelites got antsy. They requested that Aaron make a golden bull out of their earrings and nose rings, and thus they violated. They built this. They molded this calf. They broke out in drunken revelry, and when Moses saw what they had done, he ends up breaking the tablets of the Ten Commandments, symbolizing the violation of the covenant, and then he destroys the golden calf. We'll say more about that later. God threatens at this point to destroy Israel, but Moses intercedes and saves them. Moses, in conversation with God, though, asked to see God. Now, Moses spoke with God face to face. Now, this was not literally face to face, because no one can see God and live. And that's what God tells Moses, that, I'd like to see your glory. He says, well, no one can see my face and live, but I will show you my after parts, or my back. The next passage in chapter 34 seems to give the fulfillment of that. And the way that God shows his back parts is to describe his attributes. He passes before Moses and says, Yahweh, Yahweh is compassionately gracious, slow to anger and abounding in love and faithfulness, maintaining love to thousands and forgiving wickedness, rebellion, and sin. Yet he does not leave the guilty unpunished. Moses didn't see God in his essence, but he was allowed to know more of his character. And note the tension between God's holiness and God's mercy. God's holiness, he doesn't leave the guilty unpunished, and yet God's mercy, he's graciously compassionate and slow to anger and forgives sin of every kind and degree, wickedness, rebellion, and sin. And when Moses returns from this encounter with Yahweh, his face is radiant, reflecting the glory of God. And then at the end of the book, the pillar of cloud, which is the presence of God, descends upon the tabernacle, and he begins indwelling it. It says, then the cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of the Lord filled the tabernacle. And Moses could not enter the tent of the meeting, because the cloud had settled upon it, and the glory of the Lord filled the temple. And in all the travels of the Israelites, wherever the cloud lifted above the tabernacle, they would set out. But if the cloud did not lift, they did not set out till the day it lifted. And so the cloud of the Lord was over the tabernacle by day, and fire was in the cloud by night, in the sight of all the house of Israel during all their travels. It was a pillar of cloud by day, but at night the glow of the presence of God could be seen through, kind of like fireworks, where if you set off a firework during the daytime, you just see a puff of smoke, but at night you see the light. Well, anyway, this ends that discussion. We'll go back and talk about some other aspects of Exodus. The next one will be on the Decalogue in the next video.